What if the fate of the monarchy could be undone by a single sentence scrawled in a private diary? Imagine that. A kingdom built on centuries of power and tradition, shaken to its foundations by ink on a page. And not just any page, but one allegedly written by Queen Camilla herself, with chilling words about Princess Diana. I always knew Diana wouldn't last. She had to go. Now pause. Think about that. How would you feel if the woman who replaced Diana, Britain's beloved people's princess, was revealed to have penned such cruel, calculated words? The timing, the coldness, the implication. It's not just gossip, it's dynamite. And now it's in the public's hands. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. This is the scandal that has sent shockwaves through the palace and beyond. For decades, the royal family has carefully managed its image, staging every appearance, choreographing every word. But how do you control the uncontrollable, the eruption of secrets buried in a personal diary? You can't. The truth, or at least something that feels like truth, is out. And this time, Charles isn't dealing with speculation in the tabloids, whispers in Parliament, or awkward questions from the press. No, this time, he's dealing with words written in Camilla's own hand. And here's the real kicker. The nation believes them. Picture this. Millions scrolling through headlines, their jaws dropping as screenshots of Camilla's diary entries spread like wildfire. Social media lights up with outrage. How could she say that about Diana? What does this mean for the monarchy? Was there more to Diana's death than we ever knew? We have to ask ourselves, why now? Why, after all these years, does this leak explode into public view? Some claim it's revenge. Some suggest it's justice. Others whisper of palace insiders finally deciding they've had enough of protecting a woman who never truly won the people's hearts. And that's the heart of this story. Because make no mistake, Diana's shadow has never left the monarchy. She is still the silent force haunting the corridors of Buckingham Palace. Her memory is alive. Her image plastered across magazines. Her humanitarian legacy quoted by world leaders. Every time Camilla steps forward as queen consort, there's Diana, still shining brighter, still adored, still untouchable. And maybe, just maybe, this diary is the universe's way of saying, Diana has the last word. But here's the danger for Charles. He fought for Camilla, against public disapproval, against tradition, against the judgment of his own sons. He fought to make her queen. And now? Now he faces the prospect of losing everything he gambled for. Think about the irony. Charles once defied his mother, Queen Elizabeth II, to be with Camilla. He risked the crown's reputation to secure her acceptance. And yet the very woman he defended could now destroy the monarchy from within. Why does this matter now, you ask? Because the monarchy is at its most fragile point in generations. The queen is gone. Charles is struggling to command the same respect she commanded effortlessly. William and Kate carry much of the burden of popularity. Harry and Meghan are estranged, stirring chaos from the outside. And now Camilla, the supposed anchor at Charles's side, is exposed as a liability so toxic that even Parliament is beginning to murmur about the crown's survival. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Before we dig into Charles's devastating decision to divorce her, before we analyze William's fury and Harry's silence, we need to understand the magnitude of this moment. Ask yourself, what does it mean when a queen consort is caught in words that suggest complicity, or at the very least, disdain, for the woman who died under such tragic, suspicious circumstances? Does it force us to revisit old questions? To reopen wounds that never healed? To consider that Diana's fate wasn't just an accident of fate, but perhaps tangled in webs of palace intrigue? The British monarchy has weathered storms before. Abdications, affairs, wars, scandals. But this one is different. This one drags Diana back into the spotlight, not as a victim of paparazzi or car crashes, but as a woman whose ghost now stands in judgment of the very throne that rejected her. Imagine sitting in your living room, watching the news bulletin, Camilla's secret diary leaked. You hear that line read aloud. She had to go. Your stomach drops. Your mind races. What did she mean? Is this confession? Sarcasm? A cruel joke? Or something more sinister? And now picture King Charles, sitting in his study at Clarence House, staring at the front page of the Times. His face pale, his hands trembling. Because he knows the nation isn't asking questions about Camilla. They're asking questions about him. Why didn't he see this coming? Why did he defend her all these years? And most importantly, how can he possibly remain king while she remains queen? We need to pause here, because this is more than just a tabloid frenzy. This is a constitutional crisis brewing in real time. Monarchs don't divorce easily. It's a scandal that scars dynasties. Yet here, in the 21st century, with the monarchy already wobbling under the pressures of modernity, Charles faces a stark choice: protect his marriage or protect the crown. And the pressure isn't just external. It's coming from within his own family. His heir, William, furious. His youngest, Harry, outspoken. His advisors whispering that public trust is bleeding away faster than they can contain it. So let's set the stage clearly. A monarchy in peril, a queen consort under fire, a king cornered, and the ghost of Diana rising stronger than ever. This is not just a story of betrayal. It's a story of survival. But here's the twist you didn't see coming. Because the diary doesn't just contain cruel remarks. It contains patterns. Patterns that hint at influence, manipulation, and perhaps knowledge of events that should never have been hers to know. And if those patterns hold weight, the diary isn't just embarrassing, it's incriminating. So the question becomes, was Diana's fate truly sealed in Paris, or was it being whispered about in palace corridors long before the crash ever happened? Hold that thought, because what you're about to hear next will take this scandal from shocking to utterly explosive. The most disturbing entry hadn't even been revealed yet. Who leaked it? That's the question that ricocheted through every royal corridor, every news studio, every whispered conversation in pubs across Britain. A secret diary doesn't just materialize in the press by accident. Someone had to take it. Someone had to copy it. Someone had to deliver it. And in a family obsessed with loyalty, tradition, and silence, betrayal of this magnitude feels almost unthinkable. Almost. The first theory hit the airwaves within hours of the leak. A disgruntled staff member. After all, palace aides are the invisible hands that run the monarchy. They open letters, pour tea, shuffle papers, and keep secrets that could topple governments. Could one of them have stumbled across the diary while tidying Camilla's desk or archiving documents? Perhaps one who'd finally had enough of protecting a queen consort despised by the public? But the second theory carried even more sting. Could the leak have come from inside the family itself? Imagine it. A Windsor plotting against another Windsor, the same way rivals once schemed in medieval courts. Was this William, determined to protect his mother's memory? Was this Harry, bitter and estranged, striking from across the Atlantic? Or perhaps someone even closer to Camilla? Someone who knew her darkest thoughts and decided the world deserved to see them. The tabloids had a field day. "Palace mole," screamed one headline. "Revenge of Diana's loyalists," shouted another. Twitter threads spun wild possibilities. Every cousin, every aide, every bodyguard was dragged into speculation. And the longer Buckingham Palace stayed silent, the wilder the rumors became. But here's the truth. Whoever leaked the diary knew exactly what they were doing. The timing was no accident. This wasn't some dusty journal falling into the wrong hands. This was a calculated release, a weapon unleashed at the precise moment it would inflict maximum damage. Think about it. The monarchy was already on shaky ground. Public trust fractured after years of scandals. The loss of the Queen left a void impossible to fill. Harry and Meghan's accusations still hung in the air. And now, with Charles barely settled on the throne, here comes the diary, a grenade thrown straight into the palace gates. And let's not forget the choice of entry that was splashed across every headline. "I always knew Diana wouldn't last. She had to go." Out of pages of musings, why that line? Because it was the kill shot. The one sentence guaranteed to stir outrage, suspicion, and horror in equal measure. But as investigators combed through the diary, more troubling discoveries came to light. Certain phrases felt off. They weren't just cruel remarks, they were coded. Analysts noticed dates aligning with major events in Diana's life. Odd references that seemed to foreshadow tragedies or scandals. Words that felt like signals rather than musings. Could Camilla have been more than just a mistress turned queen? Could she have been aware of moves happening behind the scenes? Moves that shaped Diana's downfall? Or were these simply the paranoid ramblings of a woman consumed by jealousy? Here's the irony. The diary, meant to be private, has now become public property. Every historian, every journalist, every amateur sleuth is dissecting it line by line. And in doing so, they're uncovering a narrative that paints Camilla not as a victim of circumstance, but as a calculated operator pulling strings from the shadows. Now, imagine Charles, pacing in his private study, reading through those entries again, not just the ones quoted by the press, but the ones still hidden. Each word like a knife, each page a reminder that his queen is now the monarchy's greatest threat. And in that moment, he knows, this isn't just about gossip. It's about survival. And the palace agrees. Behind closed doors, advisors whisper, she must be distanced. Quickly, decisively, parliamentarians murmur, the monarchy cannot survive another Diana scandal. Even William's voice rings in his ears. She's done enough damage, father. But here's the cruel twist. Before Charles can act, the press uncovers something even darker about the diary's origins. It wasn't just found. It wasn't just leaked. It may have been planted, nurtured, and weaponized years ago, waiting for the perfect moment to detonate. And if that's true, then the monarchy isn't just dealing with Camilla's words. It's dealing with a conspiracy that may stretch far deeper than anyone ever imagined. Because one clue suggests this leak had been planned for years. Patterns. That's what experts began to notice once the initial shock of the diary wore off. At first, it was dismissed as venomous venting, cruel but harmless scribbles of a woman bitter about living in Diana's shadow. But then analysts, historians, and even former intelligence officers began to look closer. And what they found was unsettling. Some of the entries didn't read like private thoughts. They read like signals, almost as if Camilla had been documenting not just her feelings, but her influence. Take one entry dated months before Diana's separation from Charles was announced. Soon the crown will correct itself. Sooner than she thinks. At the time, that might sound like bitterness. But when placed against the timeline of events, the quiet maneuverings of advisors, the building tensions, it felt chillingly predictive. Or another, written weeks before Diana's infamous Panorama interview with Martin Bashir. She thinks she has freedom, but the walls close in tighter every day. One misstep, and it will all collapse. Was this coincidence? Was it jealousy? Or did Camilla somehow know the palace's plan to discredit Diana was already in motion? This is where the contradictions start piling up. On one hand, Camilla always portrayed herself as the reluctant partner, the shy woman hiding behind Charles, hated by the press. But these words suggested something else entirely. A woman who felt in control, perhaps even orchestrating the downfall of the most beloved woman in the world. So what does this mean? Was Camilla pulling strings all along? Or was she simply gloating in private, exaggerating her power because she knew no one would ever read her diary? Here's the uncomfortable truth. When you match the diary against the timeline of Diana's life, the parallels are too sharp to ignore. Notes written just before scandals broke. Veiled lines hinting at her reckoning. Even eerie foreshadowing of the car crash itself. She runs too fast, too wild. Sooner or later, speed catches the reckless. That line, scribbled in 1996, just a year before Diana's death in Paris. Can you imagine reading that now, after the fact? The hairs stand up on your arms. Was it intuition? Was it malice? Or something darker still? And here's where it gets even more dangerous for Charles. Because if the public believes Camilla's diary shows knowledge, any knowledge, of Diana's fate, then the monarchy is thrust into a moral crisis it may not survive. The crown doesn't just look complicit in adultery. It looks complicit in tragedy. Charles himself, in those years, was constantly under Camilla's sway. Friends recall how he leaned on her for advice, how her words colored his judgments. If she was whispering poison into his ear, if her diary reflects the same thoughts she planted in his mind, then suddenly Charles isn't just the grieving widower who remarried for love. He's the man who ignored warning signs, who stood by a woman who may have relished Diana's demise. And that is why the discovery of these patterns of influence hits like a thunderclap. It doesn't just paint Camilla in a sinister light, it taints Charles too. Ask yourself, how can a king lead when his queen is revealed as the possible architect of whispers that destroyed the people's princess? How can he sit on the throne knowing every eye sees not a monarch, but a husband who chose the wrong side of history? The buildup is clear. The monarchy cannot escape Diana. She is everywhere, in the tears of her sons, in the chants of the crowds, in the memes flooding social media. And now she is in Camilla's diary, like a ghost refusing to be silenced. But here's the most haunting part. One entry in particular seemed to implicate more than just Camilla. Because tucked between ordinary musings and venomous lines was a chilling passage that hinted at assurances from powerful friends, assurances that Diana would never outshine the crown again. And when that sentence came to light, even palace insiders stopped breathing. Charles under siege. That's the only way to describe it. From the moment Camilla's diary hit the front pages, the monarchy wasn't just bruised, it was bleeding. And like sharks in the water, the press, the politicians, and the public circled in for the kill. Picture the headlines splashed across every newspaper stand in Britain. Queen Camilla's chilling words about Diana. Tabloids ran banner spreads with Diana's smiling face side by side with Camilla's most damning line. She had to go. International outlets picked it up too. From New York to Sydney, anchors shook their heads in disbelief. The Queen Consort, revealed not as a figure of loyalty, but of contempt, malice, and maybe worse. Charles had weathered scandals before. He had endured jeers about the tampon tapes. He had faced fury over his cold response to Diana's death. He had even managed to rehabilitate Camilla in the public eye, dragging her from the shadows into the royal spotlight. But this was different. This wasn't a mistake of the past resurfacing. This was a wound reopened, bleeding in real time, with no bandage strong enough to stop it. Behind palace walls, aides scrambled. Crisis meetings stretched into the night. Public relations teams crafted statements, then tore them up again. Should they defend Camilla? Should they dismiss the diary as a forgery? Should they stay silent and hope it fades? But deep down, everyone knew this wasn't going to fade. Not when Diana was involved. Not when her ghost haunted every word. Meanwhile, outside those gilded gates, the outrage swelled. Crowds gathered at Kensington Palace, leaving flowers once more for Diana, as though it were 1997 all over again. Protest signs appeared outside Buckingham Palace. Justice for Diana. Camilla out. Not our queen. Social media exploded with hashtags demanding her removal. And then came Parliament. Whispers in the House of Commons grew louder by the hour. MPs asked, could a monarchy already weakened by scandals survive this? Could Charles command respect while tied to a woman so loathed, so distrusted? Some dared to float the unthinkable. Was it time to discuss stripping Camilla of her title? Or even moving Charles aside in favor of William? This wasn't just gossip anymore. It was a constitutional storm. Now imagine Charles in this moment. A man in his 70s, finally crowned after waiting his entire life, now watching it slip through his fingers. He paces. He rubs his temples. He rereads the diary excerpts, hoping, praying, that maybe they're taken out of context. But context doesn't matter anymore. The words are out there, burned into the minds of millions. He knows Camilla is furious, humiliated. He knows she expects him to defend her. But how can he? Every defense feels like an admission. Every word of support drags him deeper into the quicksand. And looming above it all is the question, what will his sons say? Because the monarchy's survival depends not just on Charles, but on William and Harry, the heirs of Diana, the boys who lost their mother in Paris, the men who have carried her memory like a torch. For years, Charles managed to paper over the cracks in their relationships. But now, the paper is ripped. The cracks are craters. And soon, the voices inside his own family will turn against him. Because while the press and Parliament raged, something even more devastating awaited behind closed doors. His own son was about to deliver an ultimatum. William's fury was unlike anything the palace had seen in years. He had endured his father's choices in silence for decades. But this was the breaking point. Imagine the scene. William, the heir to the throne, storming into his father's private office, his face pale with restrained anger, his voice trembling not from fear, but from conviction. He didn't mince words. He didn't tiptoe around the issue. She's done enough damage, father. It's time. For Charles, those words landed heavier than any headline. They weren't from Parliament. They weren't from the press. They were from his son, the man who would one day inherit the crown. The man whose very legitimacy in the eyes of the people depended on keeping Diana's memory sacred. Let's pause for a moment. William isn't just a prince. He's Diana's firstborn. He lived through the chaos of her divorce. He walked behind her coffin as a boy while the world wept. He has carried her legacy into every charity visit, every speech, every smile he gives the public. And now, he's being asked to accept Camilla as queen consort? The very woman whose words mocked his mother's life and possibly hinted at her demise? For William, it was unbearable. So he confronted his father. Accounts suggest the conversation was heated, emotional, raw. William reportedly told Charles that the monarchy could not survive if Camilla remained by his side. He accused her of tarnishing Diana's memory, of humiliating the family, of poisoning the public's trust. And then came the gut punch. William asked the one question Charles had dreaded from the start. Did you know? Did you ever suspect what she really thought about Mother? For Charles, silence was damning. Any answer would wound. Admit ignorance, and he looked weak. Admit suspicion, and he looked complicit. There was no safe ground left. Behind that confrontation lies something deeper, a generational divide. Charles grew up in an era of secrecy, duty above truth, appearances above all. William, however, grew up in Diana's world. Openness, emotion, authenticity. He knows that in today's Britain, you cannot hide behind tradition. The public demands honesty. They demand accountability. And William is determined to give it to them, even if it means tearing down what his father built. But here's where the story twists. Just as the room crackled with William's anger, another voice cut through the tension. A voice Charles hadn't expected to hear, but one that would change everything. Harry. Estranged, outspoken, unpredictable Harry. The son who left for freedom in California, but whose bond with his mother remains unshakable. He had joined the confrontation, not to defend Camilla, not to protect Charles, but to speak his truth. And when Harry finally spoke, the room fell silent. Harry's silence had always been louder than words. For years, he'd watched, he'd listened, he'd bit his tongue as the family carried on with its rituals, its rules, its masks. But now, faced with his brother's fury and his father's pale, trembling figure, he couldn't stay quiet anymore. "Do you realize what this makes us look like?" he said, his voice low but sharp, every syllable cutting through the heavy air. "The world thinks we were raised in a palace built on lies. And maybe they're right." The room froze. William shifted, his jaw clenched, but he said nothing. Charles stared at his youngest son, the one who had fled to America, the one who had torn open wounds with interviews and documentaries. For a moment, Charles looked older than his years, smaller than his crown. Harry continued. "All our lives, we were told to protect the institution, to keep quiet, to endure. But this is different. This is Mother." He spat the word like an accusation, as if Diana herself stood between them, demanding justice. And then came the dagger. "You put her first, Father. Over Mother. Over us. Over the country. And now it's destroying everything." The words hung in the air like smoke after a fire. Charles's chest rose and fell, his hands gripping the arms of his chair. He wanted to respond, to defend Camilla, to defend himself. But how? How do you argue with the truth that your own sons see etched into the public's mind? William finally broke the silence. He's right. The monarchy cannot survive her. Not after this. For Charles, this was more than a family quarrel. It was an ambush. His sons united, not in brotherly affection, but in shared rage, shared grief, shared determination to end Camilla's reign as queen consort. And behind their words lay a darker implication. If Charles refused, if he clung to Camilla, he wouldn't just lose public trust. He'd lose his sons. He'd lose the very future of the monarchy. Imagine that moment. The King of England, cornered not by Parliament, not by the press, but by his heirs. His crown suddenly felt heavy, his throne suddenly fragile. But here's where it gets even more haunting. Because as Charles wrestled with his son's ultimatum, the press uncovered another shocking detail. The diary's leak wasn't just about Diana. It contained something that pointed to how the diary itself had been released, and why. And when investigators revealed it, even the palace couldn't contain the panic. Who leaked it? That question had haunted every headline since the scandal erupted, but now the narrative took an even darker turn. The public had assumed it was a rogue aide, maybe a disloyal family member, or even a hacking scandal. But evidence was beginning to suggest something far more deliberate, far more dangerous. The first clue came from the very pages themselves. Journalists noted that the diary extracts weren't random. They weren't messy or incomplete, the way a real leak often looks. No, these pages were curated, selected, the worst possible lines about Diana, polished and presented with surgical precision. Someone had combed through Camilla's writings and chosen exactly what would hit hardest. Then came the second clue. A watermark on one of the scanned pages, faint but visible, traced back to a high-end copier used only by government offices and, curiously, by certain intelligence services. That raised eyebrows. Why would Camilla's private diary have passed through machines used by the state? Unless someone wanted it to. The theory exploded. Was this leak an inside job orchestrated by forces larger than the family? Was it designed not just to humiliate Camilla, but to destabilize Charles himself? Some pointed fingers at Diana's loyalists, individuals still embedded in the establishment, determined to avenge her memory even decades later. Others suggested foreign intelligence might have seized the opportunity to weaken the monarchy at a time when Britain's global influence was already in question. But the most chilling speculation came from within the palace walls. Could this have been planned from the start? Could Camilla's diary itself have been a trap, something someone always intended to use against her when the time was right? Think about that for a moment. A diary, kept close to her heart, never meant for public eyes, quietly preserved by someone who knew its explosive potential. Perhaps a staff member who photocopied it years ago. Perhaps a family insider who kept a copy locked away. Someone patient enough to wait. Someone ruthless enough to strike. And strike they did. Because the timing was perfect. Charles was newly king, still fragile on the throne. Camilla had only just been crowned queen consort, still struggling for legitimacy. The queen herself, Elizabeth II, the monarchy's unshakable anchor, was gone. It was the perfect storm. So here's the uncomfortable question. Was this a leak or an execution? Public speculation only grew. Conspiracy forums claimed the leak had been scheduled for release around a major royal event, designed to overshadow Charles's authority. Political commentators noted how quickly anti-monarchy groups seized on it, calling for referendums, waving banners that read, "Abolish the crown." And within the palace, paranoia grew. Who knew? Who had access? Who could be trusted? Every aide, every advisor, every guard was suddenly under suspicion. Security briefings stretched late into the night. Trust dissolved into fear. But here's the most sinister part. Tucked within one of the diary's later entries was a line that shook investigators. Assurances have been given. She will never eclipse us again. That sentence, vague but loaded, hinted at knowledge Camilla should never have had. It suggested connections. It suggested complicity. And that's when the story shifted from scandal to conspiracy. Because if this diary was leaked with surgical precision, timed to perfection, and filled with cryptic phrases that lined up with Diana's downfall, then this wasn't just about Camilla's cruelty. It was about something far larger, something orchestrated. The question wasn't just who leaked it. It was who planned it years ago, and why wait until now to unleash it. And as that realization dawned, even Charles began to fear that he wasn't fighting to save his marriage. He was fighting to save the monarchy itself. Because one clue suggested this leak had been planned for years. The diary's patterns were troubling enough, but when investigators pieced together the timeline of its preservation, one chilling truth emerged. This was no spontaneous betrayal. The leak had been planned. For years. Think about that. Somewhere in the background of royal life, through Diana's death, Charles's remarriage, William and Harry growing up, even the passing of Queen Elizabeth, someone was sitting on this weapon, waiting. They knew the moment would come when Camilla's words would matter more than ever. They knew the diary could detonate like a bomb at the exact point of maximum impact. And they waited with cold precision. How do we know this? Because experts uncovered evidence that copies of Camilla's diary had circulated quietly long before the public ever saw them. Former palace aides admitted, off the record, that whispers of her dark entries had surfaced as early as the late 2000s. One even claimed that portions had been shown discreetly to journalists who, fearing libel suits or palace retaliation, buried them deep in filing cabinets. But here's where it gets sinister. Each time the subject arose, it vanished again, smothered by influence, silenced by fear. It's almost as if someone powerful ensured the diary remained hidden, until now. So why unleash it in Charles's first year as king? Because timing is everything. With Queen Elizabeth gone, the monarchy's aura of untouchable stability died with her. Charles, already unpopular, struggled to earn loyalty. Camilla, though crowned queen consort, still carried the stain of being the other woman. Britain itself is divided, with calls for a republic louder than at any time in modern history. Whoever held the diary understood that this was the moment to strike, the moment the monarchy could least afford another scandal. And strike they did. The result? A firestorm no PR machine could contain. But here's the deeper twist. Some investigators claim the diary leak wasn't just about Camilla. It was about Diana. They believe loyalists to Diana, friends, allies, maybe even sympathizers in high places, kept those words locked away, vowing that one day they would come to light. To remind the world of what Diana endured. To hold Camilla accountable. To haunt Charles with the memory of the woman he betrayed. If true, then this isn't just a scandal. It's vengeance from beyond the grave. And Charles feels it. Every night, in the quiet of his study, the question gnaws at him. Who waited all these years to bring this to life? Was it a former servant with a vendetta? A journalist seeking the ultimate scoop? Or was it something more organized? An orchestrated campaign to dismantle his reign before it could truly begin? Either way, the damage is done. The leak was too perfectly timed, too precise to be accidental. And the nation knows it. People whisper not only about Camilla's words, but about the power behind the leak itself. If someone could hold this secret for decades and unleash it with such devastating force, what else lies hidden? What other truths about Diana, about the monarchy, might still be waiting in the shadows? For the public, the answer doesn't matter. What matters is the fury, the betrayal, the sense that Diana's ghost has risen again, armed with Camilla's own hand as the weapon. And that fury is now directed squarely at Charles. For the king, there is no escape. The crown is cornered. But if Charles thought the storm outside was unbearable, he was about to learn that the storm within his family would prove even worse. Because the next stage of this crisis wasn't about who leaked the diary. It was about what those words meant and how the nation would judge them. The people's verdict came fast, furious, and merciless. Once the diary's words circulated, Britain seemed to split open along a fault line that had never truly healed since 1997, the day Diana died. Within hours of the leak, crowds gathered at Kensington Palace, leaving flowers, cards, candles, just like they had in those grief-stricken days after Diana's crash. The message was clear. Diana's memory wasn't just alive. It was burning brighter than ever, fueled now by outrage. Strangers held vigils. Mothers told their children about the princess who hugged AIDS patients, who walked through minefields, who embodied kindness in a cold, aristocratic world. And across from that image stood Camilla, painted as callous, manipulative, even cruel. Social media erupted. Hashtags trended worldwide. Hashtag justice for Diana. Hashtag Camilla out. Hashtag not our queen. Memes circulated showing Diana's radiant smile side by side with Camilla's diary line. She had to go. The contrast was brutal, and it stuck. For younger generations who barely remembered Diana, the diary transformed her from a figure in history books into a wronged heroine whose truth had finally come to light. Then came the polls. Within a week, surveys showed a seismic collapse in support for Camilla. Over 70% of Britons said she should step down as queen consort. Nearly half said Charles himself should abdicate in favor of William. The numbers weren't just bad. They were catastrophic. And it wasn't confined to Britain. Global outlets ran scathing coverage. In America, talk show hosts asked bluntly, "Why is Camilla still queen?" In Australia and Canada, Republican movements seized the moment, demanding referendums to cut ties with the monarchy altogether. Even in Europe, where monarchies are more symbolic than powerful, commentators marveled at the self-inflicted wound shaking Buckingham Palace. But here's what cut deepest. The Church of England, the very institution intertwined with the crown, began to murmur. Clergy questioned whether a monarchy tainted by such words could still serve as a moral compass. One archbishop was quoted privately saying, "The ghost of Diana has become a spiritual force the monarchy cannot contain." And through it all, the palace tried to hold the line. Carefully worded statements spoke of privacy, of context, of respect for the late Princess of Wales. But it was like throwing water on a wildfire. Nothing could extinguish the fury. Inside the gates, Camilla retreated. She avoided public appearances, citing ill health. But absence only fueled the rage. Every day she stayed hidden. The people filled in the blanks themselves, imagining her guilty, ashamed, afraid. Charles, meanwhile, was cornered. Every advisor told him the same thing. The monarchy couldn't withstand this. The people wouldn't forgive. Parliament wouldn't stay quiet. And his sons, his own flesh and blood, were demanding action. The king who had waited 70 years for the crown now faced the most devastating choice of his life. And soon, the choice was made. Because when the fury reached its peak, Charles stepped forward with an announcement that would stun the world. He had decided to divorce Camilla. The announcement landed like a thunderclap across Britain and beyond. Divorce. The word itself carried a historical weight that made the monarchy tremble. For centuries, royal marriages were meant to be unbreakable symbols of duty and endurance, even when they were miserable, even when they were cruel. And now here was King Charles, the man who fought tooth and nail to have Camilla by his side, declaring to the world that it was over. It wasn't just a marital split. It was survival. The palace crafted the statement with icy precision. In order to preserve the stability and future of the monarchy, it read, His Majesty King Charles III has taken the decision to dissolve his marriage to Queen Consort Camilla. No apologies, no affection, no explanations. Just a clinical act of political triage, cutting out the infected limb to save the body. But behind those words was turmoil. Advisors described Charles as visibly broken, slumped in his chair, the weight of the crown never heavier. He had defended Camilla for decades, endured ridicule, sacrificed public goodwill, even defied his own mother to marry her. And now, under the crushing force of public rage and his son's ultimatum, he signed it all away. Yet the nation didn't see his grief. They saw justice. Crowds erupted outside Buckingham Palace, chanting Diana's name. Commentators hailed it as the people's victory. Newspapers splashed bold headlines. Camilla out. Justice for Diana. For once, Charles seemed to be listening. Not to his advisors, not to tradition, but to his people. The impact was immediate. Poll numbers that had cratered began to stabilize. Support for William surged, with many proclaiming him the true future of the monarchy. Even critics of the crown softened, whispering that perhaps the institution could survive after all, if it was willing to sacrifice one of its own. But what of Camilla? Inside Clarence's house, she was said to be incandescent with rage. Friends claimed she felt betrayed, abandoned after years of loyalty. She had stood by Charles through public humiliation, endured insults and jeers, clawed her way to a coronation, and now, cast aside at the first whiff of scandal. Some said she threatened to fight, to tell her side of the story, to expose secrets that could shatter the monarchy further. And here's where the danger deepened. Because if Camilla chose retaliation, if she opened her mouth and confirmed, even half-confirmed, the suspicions swirling around her diary, the monarchy's attempt to save itself could backfire spectacularly. A divorce was meant to be the end of the scandal. But with Camilla, silence was never guaranteed. Behind closed doors, Charles knew this. His decision to divorce was not just an act of strength, but of desperation. He was gambling that the act of casting her aside would calm the storm long enough for the monarchy to endure. But if Camilla chose vengeance, the gamble could destroy him completely. Imagine her sitting alone, diary clutched in her hands, whispering to herself, "If they think they can erase me, they're wrong." The monarchy had won a momentary reprieve, but it had also created a new enemy, one who knew its secrets, its weaknesses, and its deepest scandals. And as the dust settled, one chilling question lingered in the air. How would Camilla respond to the ultimate betrayal? Camilla's fury was volcanic. For decades, she had been the woman in the shadows, the mistress mocked, the interloper despised. She had clawed her way through ridicule, endured the venom of the press, and finally emerged as queen consort, crowned, legitimized, triumphant. And now? Now she was being cast out like a disposable pawn, sacrificed to save the institution she had fought so hard to be part of. She felt humiliated, betrayed, and most of all, dangerous. Close friends described her as seething in private, pacing rooms, muttering about Charles's cowardice. "After everything I've done," she allegedly snapped, "this is how he thanks me?" Those who dared to approach her said her eyes burned with a kind of rage that wasn't just personal, it was strategic. Because Camilla knew things. She had been inside every royal conversation for decades, privy to secrets that could make the House of Windsor collapse in on itself. And whispers spread fast. Would Camilla go quietly, or would she retaliate? The press was hungry for answers. Rumors swirled that she was preparing to write her own memoir, a tell-all diary to counter the one that destroyed her. A queen's confession, some speculated, that could expose Charles, William, even the late queen herself. Imagine the headlines. Intimate details of palace feuds, scandals buried by money and influence, truths the monarchy had spent generations hiding. But even more terrifying was the possibility that she might unleash more from her diary. Remember, the leaks so far had only revealed fragments. What if Camilla had darker passages, hidden pages, that she could now dangle over Charles's head like a guillotine? Each line more poisonous than the last. Each word capable of reigniting Diana's ghost, dragging the monarchy through fresh flames of outrage. Charles's advisors panicked. A divorce was meant to close the chapter, to cut her off, to let the monarchy heal. But if Camilla chose scorched earth, the gamble could backfire spectacularly. She had nothing left to lose, and a lifetime of grudges to settle. Meanwhile, her allies in the aristocracy whispered about her next moves. Some urged her to flee abroad, reinvent herself as a wronged queen in exile. Others claimed she was already consulting legal teams, preparing for a financial settlement so vast it would bleed the monarchy dry. And still others suggested she might simply talk. Go on television. Give the world her unfiltered side of the story. Can you imagine the drama? A tearful Camilla, sitting across from a primetime interviewer, saying, "They've made me the villain. But the truth is far darker than they want you to know." One interview like that, one explosive revelation, and Charles's divorce decision would look less like strength and more like a catastrophic miscalculation. The palace braced itself. Silence wasn't guaranteed. Compliance wasn't certain. And the woman they had tried to erase was suddenly the most dangerous voice in Britain. Because while the world thought Diana's shadow had toppled Camilla, there was now the very real possibility that Camilla herself might burn the entire institution down. And as the monarchy waited, holding its breath, one question loomed larger than ever. Would Camilla stay silent, or would she light the match? The shadow of Diana grew longer with every passing day. Even though she had been gone for more than 2 decades, her presence felt more alive than ever, haunting the palace, dominating the headlines, and overshadowing every move the monarchy tried to make. Outside Buckingham Palace, people weren't chanting for Charles, or even for William. They were chanting for Diana. Diana forever. Queen of Hearts. Banners waved with her face, her image glowing brighter in the public imagination than it had since the 1990s. To the people, she wasn't just a memory, she was justice incarnate. And every blow that landed on Camilla felt like Diana's spirit delivering retribution. Inside the palace, staff whispered of an irony too sharp to ignore. The woman who had once been pushed aside, humiliated, and hunted by the press now seemed to rise like a ghost, reclaiming the throne in death that she was denied in life. And Camilla, the woman who once thought she had won, was being consumed by Diana's legacy. The media leaned into this symbolism. Headlines read, "The Ghost Who Won." Documentaries about Diana suddenly re-aired, drawing record audiences. Old footage of her charity work went viral, as if reminding the world of the stark difference between the compassionate princess and the scorned queen consort. Even Netflix reran The Crown, fueling renewed debates about how Diana was treated and how much of her downfall was orchestrated from within. And Charles? He couldn't escape her either. Every speech he made, every public appearance, was drowned out by comparisons. Diana had been adored. Diana had been real. Diana had connected with people in a way Charles never could. And now, with Camilla disgraced, every glance at the king was also a reminder of the woman he had failed, both as a husband and as a monarch in waiting. For William, the resurgence of Diana's image was both painful and powerful. Painful, because it reopened wounds he had spent years trying to heal. Powerful, because it reminded the world why his mother mattered, and why he, as her son, carried the torch of her memory. Crowds rallied around him as the true heir, the one who could restore Diana's spirit to the throne. Every appearance he made with Kate Middleton amplified this narrative, Diana's legacy reborn through her eldest son and his wife. But the deeper irony lay in Camilla's unraveling. She had spent her entire life fighting against Diana's ghost. For years, she tried to rehabilitate her image, to become accepted, even loved. And just when she reached the pinnacle of her power, crowned beside Charles, it all came crashing down because of words she herself had written, words that made Diana immortal once more. The monarchy itself felt the shift. Advisors admitted privately that Diana had become an almost mythic figure, a rallying point for those disillusioned with the crown. She is bigger than the institution now, one source whispered. And if Diana's memory was bigger than the monarchy, then what chance did Charles and Camilla have of surviving? But here's the twist. Just as people began to believe Diana's legacy was the final blow, a darker realization crept in. The diary's words didn't just tarnish Camilla, they cast shadows over the entire family. If Camilla truly hinted at assurances, if her writings aligned too neatly with Diana's downfall, then questions about complicity grew louder. Did others know? Did Charles? Was Diana's fate sealed long before Paris? The ghost of Diana wasn't just haunting Camilla anymore. She was haunting the crown itself. And the monarchy braced for what could come next, not just a crisis of scandal, but the possibility of total unraveling. Because if Diana's truth was ever fully uncovered, it wouldn't just destroy Camilla. It could bring down the monarchy as we know it. Global frenzy. That's what erupted next. What had begun as a scandal within Britain morphed into an international obsession, a spectacle replayed on every channel, in every newspaper, across every digital feed. CNN ran the headline. King Charles in crisis. Divorce from Camilla amid Diana diary leak. In France, where Diana's tragic death still lingers like an open wound, Le Monde wrote, "Justice for Diana at last?" In Australia and Canada, where Republican movements were already simmering, primetime anchors bluntly asked, "Why keep the monarchy at all?" The story wasn't just about Charles and Camilla anymore. It was about whether the British crown could survive in a modern world. And the timing couldn't have been worse. Britain was grappling with economic strain, political turmoil, and fading faith in its institutions. The monarchy had long been a unifying force, until now. The diary's words turned it into a global laughingstock. Late-night comedians mocked Charles as the king of scandals. American talk shows replayed Camilla's damning line with dramatic flair. Diana, once again, became a symbol of purity wronged by a cold establishment. Crowds outside Buckingham Palace doubled, then tripled. Chants grew louder. Abolish the crown, mixed uneasily with justice for Diana, a paradox that revealed the heart of the crisis. Some wanted the monarchy to survive, but with William and Kate at the helm. Others saw the scandal as the perfect chance to end it altogether. And into this chaos stepped the global Diana cult. Charities she once touched resurfaced her memory in statements. Celebrities posted tributes. Young activists who hadn't even been alive when Diana walked through minefields now posted clips of her compassion with captions like, "This is leadership. This is what we lost." Diana wasn't just back. She was larger than life, a saintly counterpoint to a monarchy drowning in disgrace. Meanwhile, palace officials scrambled to control international fallout. They reached out to Commonwealth leaders, desperate to hold the alliance together. But whispers leaked that several nations were using the scandal as leverage, quietly preparing referendums to sever ties with the monarchy. The dominoes were shaking, and one push could topple them. And at the center of it all was Charles, looking more fragile with each appearance. The cameras caught it, the hunched shoulders, the hesitant steps, the haunted eyes of a man whose lifelong dream had curdled into a nightmare. Every speech he gave was drowned out by questions shouted about Diana, about Camilla, about abdication. But perhaps the most unsettling whispers came not from the press, not from protesters, but from within the palace itself. A handful of courtiers, those closest to William, began quietly floating an idea that once would have been treasonous. Maybe it was time for Charles to step aside. The logic was brutal but undeniable. William was young, popular, and carried Diana's halo. Charles was tarnished, weary, and tethered to a queen who had become toxic. If the monarchy was to survive internationally, maybe Charles had to go. And yet, even as those whispers grew, Camilla herself had not yet spoken publicly. Not a word, not a statement, not even a denial. Which led to the chilling question the world now asked in unison. What would Camilla do next? Meghan and Harry could not stay silent forever. Across the Atlantic, in their Montecito mansion, the Sussexes watched as the palace burned under the weight of Camilla's diary. For once, it wasn't them in the firing line. It was Charles and Camilla. And the irony wasn't lost on anyone. Harry, especially, carried the heaviest burden. His mother's face was suddenly everywhere again, plastered across magazines, trending on social media, her voice and legacy resurrected in a storm of fury. For him, the diary wasn't just scandal. It was personal. It was his mother's vindication. Every cruel line Camilla had written seemed to confirm what he had always suspected, that Diana was despised, undermined, and perhaps even targeted by those closest to her. When asked during a U.S. interview about the diary, Harry's words were measured but devastating. "It doesn't surprise me. My mother warned us. She told us things weren't as they seemed. I think the world is finally seeing that for themselves." He didn't have to say Camilla's name. The implication was enough. Meghan, too, weighed in, but from a different angle. She drew parallels between her own experience and Diana's, subtly casting Camilla as part of the same system that had driven both women to despair. "History has a way of repeating itself," she said in a podcast appearance. "And when the truth comes out, it's painful, but it's necessary." Their words electrified the debate. To Camilla's defenders, what few remained, it looked like Harry and Meghan were exploiting the scandal. But to Diana's faithful, it was confirmation that her sons were united at last, if only in their shared fury at the stepmother who had replaced her. Meanwhile, William and Harry's fractured relationship seemed to thaw, at least temporarily. Reports surfaced of late-night calls between the brothers, conversations about their mother, their children, and the monarchy's future. The press seized on the idea of Diana's boys reunited, a narrative so powerful it overshadowed even Charles himself. And that terrified the palace. Because if William and Harry stood together, guided by Diana's memory, they became an unstoppable force. A living embodiment of the Princess of Wales's legacy, stronger than any crown, any throne. The public adored it. The monarchy feared it. But not everyone was convinced this unity would last. Old wounds between the brothers still lingered. Distrust simmered. And Camilla, if she chose to strike back, could easily widen the cracks. Imagine her, in her fury, hinting at secrets about Meghan, about Harry's exit, about private conversations that could splinter the brothers again. This was the dangerous game now unfolding. For every move William and Harry made together, Camilla had the power to counter. The monarchy was no longer just battling public fury. It was battling internal wars, transatlantic divides, and the ghosts of Diana's unfinished story. And as pressure mounted, one thing became clear. This wasn't just a family scandal anymore. It was a battle for the very survival of the monarchy itself. Because while Charles struggled to cling to his throne, Republican voices across the Commonwealth grew bolder. In Australia, in Canada, in the Caribbean, leaders began openly questioning why their nations should bow to a monarchy engulfed in disgrace. The question shifted from what will Camilla do next to something far more dangerous. Could the monarchy itself survive this storm? The calls for reform quickly turned into calls for revolution. Across the Commonwealth, leaders who had long walked a delicate line with the monarchy suddenly felt emboldened. In Australia, politicians revived the push for a referendum on becoming a republic, citing Camilla's diary as proof that the crown was outdated, corrupt, and incapable of moral leadership. "Why should we swear loyalty?" one MP declared, "to a monarchy haunted by scandal, secrets, and betrayal?" In Canada, the debate spilled into Parliament. Indigenous leaders argued that the crown had already failed in its responsibilities, and now, with Diana's ghost resurfacing and Camilla's cruelty exposed, the monarchy's symbolic role looked more hollow than ever. Caribbean nations, too, seized the moment. Jamaica, already moving toward cutting ties, accelerated its plans, while whispers spread in Barbados and Antigua about following suit. The monarchy wasn't just losing favor, it was losing its empire. At home in Britain, protests grew larger, louder, and more organized. "Not our queen," transformed into "not our king." Crowds outside Buckingham Palace demanded not only Camilla's removal, which Charles had already enacted, but his abdication. For the first time in modern history, opinion polls showed a majority of young Britons in favor of abolishing the monarchy altogether. For Charles, the walls were closing in. He had thought divorcing Camilla would calm the storm, but instead, it had only emboldened the opposition. The sacrifice had been seen not as strength, but as weakness, proof that the monarchy could be bent, pressured, and broken by public fury. And yet, amid the chaos, there was one glimmer of hope. William. Every poll showed that the public still believed in him. His popularity soared to heights not seen since Diana herself. With Kate by his side, he represented stability, compassion, and continuity, everything Charles and Camilla had failed to embody. The monarchy, battered and bloodied, clung desperately to William's image as its last lifeline. But here's the danger. William's rise came at the cost of his father's authority. Every cheer for William sounded like a jeer for Charles. Every headline praising the heir's composure reminded the world of the king's weakness. Behind palace doors, advisors whispered that the only way forward might be unthinkable. Abdication. Let William take the throne now, while there was still something left to save. And then came the irony. The monarchy, an institution built on the idea of permanence, stability, and unshakable tradition, suddenly felt fragile, uncertain, temporary. One woman's diary, one line, "She had to go," had opened a crack that threatened to swallow centuries of history. And yet, through all this noise, one voice remained silent. Camilla, the woman at the heart of it all. The woman who had been cast out, but still held the power to destroy what was left. Would she remain in the shadows, broken and defeated? Or would she return with a vengeance, her silence replaced by revelations so devastating that even William's halo couldn't protect the monarchy? Because if Camilla chose to retaliate, the crown wasn't just at risk of reform or even abdication. It was at risk of annihilation. The palace had survived divorces before. It had even survived abdication. But nothing could prepare it for the possibility of Camilla striking back. Because while Charles's divorce was meant to silence the scandal, to amputate the infected limb before the rot spread, insiders whispered a terrifying truth. Camilla wasn't finished. Those who knew her best described her as quietly calculating in the aftermath, not broken, not beaten. "She's not the type to just vanish," one former aide said. "She's got too much pride, too much anger. And she's got ammunition." That ammunition was her knowledge. Camilla hadn't simply lived alongside the monarchy, she had lived inside it. She knew its secrets, its grudges, its scandals that never saw the light of day. Conversations whispered in corridors, rivalries buried under protocol, deals struck in private meetings. She had it all, locked in her memory, perhaps even written in journals beyond the one that had already exploded. And if she chose to use it? Imagine the headlines. Camilla confirming suspicions of Charles's weakness, of William's temper, of Harry's estrangement. Imagine her exposing the internal feuds that had poisoned the family for decades. Or worse still, imagine her hinting at darker truths about Diana. Conversations that had been buried, actions that had been hidden. One interview, one book, one televised appearance, and the monarchy's fragile attempt at recovery would shatter overnight. Charles knew this. His advisors knew it. That's why the divorce settlement was rumored to be staggering. Not just money, but properties, protections, guarantees of silence. But even the best legal contracts cannot bind a woman scorned, especially one with the world's attention at her feet. And here lies the contradiction. For decades, Camilla had been loathed. She was the other woman, the homewrecker, the villain in Diana's tragedy. But now, with her diary exposed and her marriage ended, she stood at a crossroads. She could fade into obscurity, reviled but forgotten. Or she could seize this moment to redefine herself. Not as a queen, but as the ultimate whistleblower, the woman who dared to tear the mask off the monarchy. The world waited. Every silence, every day she stayed hidden, only amplified the tension. Was she plotting? Was she negotiating? Was she preparing her own story? Or was the silence itself a weapon, designed to keep Charles awake at night, waiting for the blow he couldn't stop? Inside the palace, paranoia grew. Who was she talking to? What would she reveal? Would her revenge be financial, emotional, or nuclear? Charles, already weakened by the scandal, now faced the unthinkable possibility that his ex-wife could become the monarchy's executioner. And yet, even as Camilla's threat loomed, the monarchy faced another ghost. Diana's presence hadn't faded with the divorce. It had grown. Her image, her legacy, her story, it was everywhere, a haunting reminder that the crown's most beloved figure wasn't one of the living royals, but the one they had lost. That was the true danger, because even if Camilla stayed silent, even if Charles survived, the monarchy was trapped under the shadow of a woman who had died in Paris nearly 3 decades ago. And the more Diana's ghost rose, the more people began to ask, could the monarchy survive a truth it had spent decades burying?